This is part 2 of a consideration of Jewish, Christian and Islamic perspectives in ethics. We'll be focusing on Aquinas and his concern and teaching about natural law. This unit is very much connected to the main portion of the video concerning Unit 5, Jewish, Christian and Islamic perspectives. It's connected because while deontological ethics, rule ethics, the rule of divine command law might be common to all, it involved a distinctive element in which the divine command law could, the way a divine command could come. First, it could come through revelation, and that was the primary topic of conversation in our previous video. But there is an element in both Jewish, Christian and Islamic traditions here of what is called natural law. And the best illustration of that, and perhaps the most influential, is that outlined by Thomas Aquinas. And so it's worthy of us to taking account of his views and his views of natural law and how he got them, because they very much impact all of these traditions. Quite amazingly how they do interact. And partly that's because Thomas Aquinas is very much a successor of Aristotle. So in a sense he is turning Aristotle's non-theistic thinking into theistic thinking. One of his primary concerns is to Christianize the philosophy of Aristotle, or to make it as compatible as he can with Christianity. Aquinas is one of the great minds of the Western world. Well, what are we going to do today? We're going to have a look at his epistemology and be aware of particularly his 3 levels of knowledge, because that's how the natural law element starts to unfold. We have to understand the role of the tabula rasa. The concept of the human mind is a blank slate. That is what Aristotle taught, it's what Aquinas teaches. And that's why that central level of the 3 levels of knowledge, the knowledge of natural law, becomes so important, because it means that every human being can share in that, both a person of faith and a person of non-faith. And we had to explain his view of the relationship between faith and reason. And then that leads us into an understanding of his vision of value theory, his seeing the 4 laws, how that ties together the 3 levels of the house, and yet maintains a way to speak to the world on natural law, and his brief concept of virtue. So a little bit to be considered there. I've given you a list of some of the major events surrounding his life. His life takes place at a time when the Crusades are coming to an end. And he is going to be influential in all kinds of other ways as well, but it's a time when Christendom is recovering from some pretty substantial defeats in the East. Jerusalem has fallen. The Constantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, if you will, is under serious threat. The church is divided between East and West. And Thomas is born in 1225, just after all this begins to become clear that Christianity is in a state of crisis. At least its political influence is. His life becomes an interesting journey, an interesting story about him. He always wanted to be a monk, a priest. He was interested in scholarly work. His family wanted him to be a lawyer. The story is that they locked him in a tower for a year to try and dissuade him from becoming a monk. But eventually they yielded to his wishes and he became a very famous monk. You can see the story of his life outlined there and the general outline of what's going on during that period of time. But it's certainly a period of great disruption. And it means that when he begins writing, he has 2 very big concerns. Science and the new science is beginning to have a profound impact upon Western civilization, due to the Renaissance unfolding, and it's going to be further impacted by the Reformation which follows. So the relationship of faith and reason is a big issue for him. And then, of course, he wants to reconcile Aristotle's views with Christianity. And now, he's also influenced by Augustine. We've briefly mentioned him when we discussed the Christian tradition. And things like truth is unity. The important distinction here is that he believed, as did Augustine, different reasons why Augustine believed it was possible for all humans to have knowledge, but they both believed that human beings possessed knowledge. They could possess truth. Augustine's view was faith was used to seek understanding. Aquinas perceives the unity of truth and emphasizes that and says that there are some points in which we can all agree, and we'll talk about that more when we come to it. And he wants to bridge the gap between faith and reason using natural revelation, natural law. So that brings us first a quick look at his view of the human soul. He's following Aristotle here. The body is the soul is the form of the body. It is also, he says it's special, as a unique kind of substance. It's not a physical substance, it's a spiritual substance. And it can live beyond the body and live separately from the body. In this sense, he's very much like Plato. But like all metaphysical dualists, old and new, defining the relationship between body, material, and soul, immaterial, is extremely difficult. And it's fascinating to read in that regard. All right, let's turn now to his 3 levels of knowledge. This is very important. There were those people in his age who were saying that where science disagreed with the Bible had to be supreme. There were others saying where the science disagreed with the Bible, science had to be supreme. There were 2 choices as far as people were concerned. That's oversimplifying the debate, but it will do for our purposes here. He comes along, he wants to say that truth is one, it's the same for everyone, but some truths are available in a way which is available to people's knowledge by reason and by natural experience. That's the bottom level. And there are some truths, and this is very important, that are available from the Bible and available from reason, and the 2 could stand side by side. For him, it's very important that the Bible gave reasons for believing God exists, so he came up with reasons why God exists using reason. He came up with the Bible giving rules for morality, and he saw in natural law and in nature, God revealing in nature laws we could follow. This is this middle level, truth known by reason and revelation. And then truth only known by revelation. It's like the Trinity. Now, what's important is this means that 2 of the levels of knowledge are available to all men, of all kinds. And it means that natural law, which conforms with biblical revelation of law, becomes very important. In other words, it's a basis for persuading the world to adopt a certain set of ethical standards and moral rules. And that's the background reasoning to his perspective. We'll come more to that in a moment. And part of him saying that these 3 levels of knowledge are important to show the first level known by reason and experience, the second by reason and revelation. These 2 levels, because we all come and begin the process of knowledge from the same place. We begin with minds that are a blank slate. We can't know anything except through experience, and this is what we experience. using reason and experience. And so quite clearly he has this interesting relationship between faith and reason. You see, at the top story we have truth only known by revelation. At the bottom we have truth known by reason and experience. And in between we have this meeting area, this bridge between the two. And by this he's trying to reconcile faith and reason. I've got a little note here for you. In the PowerPoint you can look at this about the tabular racer. It's underscoring his starting points there. And a little more for you to understand faith and reason. But let's turn now to his value theory. We look here at his view of happiness, because it's his greatest value, which is to be seen ultimately in the beatific vision. That is not a beautiful vision, but a beatific vision. Behind that is the 4 laws, which help us get to the beatific vision, and the nature of virtue and the beatific vision. So let's begin here, first and foremost, with happiness. In this, again, he's starting where Aristotle starts. We want to be happy. Perhaps if he was forced theologically to discuss this, he'd talk about men are happy when they're glorifying God, but happy. And indeed, Aquinas is going to define happiness, taking that aspect of God into it as well, which Aquinas did, Aristotle did not. Happiness, it's as correct choices, correct actions, correct thoughts, which come out of our knowledge of God. And such happiness, he says, find its ultimate state in the beatific vision. Now, what's the beatific vision? In this life, all we have is knowledge of God by means of mediation. We have the Bible and natural law, according to Aristotle, according to Aquinas, and these things give us knowledge of God, and that begins to make us happy. But the ultimate happiness comes as we know God completely, when we know Him directly, and that can only occur usually when we have died and gone into the presence of God. But some saints are given a picture or given a vision of the beatific vision. And even in this life, they get a picture of the beatific vision. So it is always worth striving after the beatific vision. So it's a unique kind of happiness, which is peace with God, knowing God, and being at peace with God. This really reiterates what I've just been saying to you there. The bottom line of this slide is what's important here. The beatific vision's achieved when we have fulfilled the eternal law of God. When we know God as He is and all the thoughts of God and what His ultimate will and purposes are. We'll come back to what the eternal law of God is in a moment. But again, it just drives out this issue that it is reaching that knowledge of the eternal law of God, which is giving one that beatific vision, the ultimate experience of happiness. And that brings us to the 4 laws. These come out of his understanding of the 3 stories of understanding. I'm going to give you the 60,000 foot perspective on this one. What is this eternal law of God? Well, again, Aquinas is a lover of reason and is very much committed to the idea that God is essentially a God of reason. So he wants to say that God's reason expresses Himself analogically. It's reflected in His creation and His self-revelation. It's an analog. And it's that reflection of God's rationality, His reasonableness, His righteousness, His justice and holiness, which is the eternal law of God. One might have expected him to say that with a sum total of theology, but he says it's the eternal law of God. He's not in any way diminishing the importance of theology. When you make your way through his Summa Theologica, a massive work, which is enormous in size, The theology is very much a big deal for him. But he's interested in expressing this eternal law of God as being the ultimate expression of God's rationalness. And that rationalness of God is reflected in everything he does. It's reflected in what he says, and most importantly, it's reflected in nature. And that nature is implanted and stamped upon the entire cosmos, and upon human beings, upon their very conscience. As such, it becomes the basis of the moral law for human beings. See, the natural law is a reflection of the eternal law. It applies to creations and to humans. And as such, it is an expression of the very moral law of God. Now to that he adds the divine law. These are the laws that are actually communicated by God. For example, the Ten Commandments. They are divine laws. And fourthly, we have human law, laws that we create by virtue of being a civil society. And what he's going to argue is that this natural law, this moral law, is available and known by all of us, regardless of whether we are persons of faith or not, because it's stamped upon the very cosmos, and it's stamped within us. And that law that we know and understand and can discern, using reason, that law will end up being consistent with the divine law, and in a sense a reflection of the eternal law. Now this is very important, because for Western civilization, the arguments for a law or a moral rule based upon nature have been profoundly important. For example, in justification of laws that were made to assert that, for example, homosexuality was immoral, those laws were based upon the principle that what was engaged in homosexuality was an unnatural act, and by virtue of being unnatural, it was immoral. Now, of course, the scripture, the revelation, said the same thing, but you have the scripture saying homosexualism is wrong, and you have the arguments from natural law saying it. Of course, our society has rejected many of the natural law arguments for things like laws against homosexuality and others, but nonetheless, one cannot deny the power and influence of natural law in Western society. It's profoundly important, and one needs to come have an idea of it. Briefly on virtue, because it's interesting here. Like Aristotle, he believes that virtue is a habit of choosing rightly in relation to the ultimate purpose of life. You're living your life toward the beatific vision, and the leading to right choices that along that pathway. And as you move along that pathway, you're going to have certain virtues which are common to all men, again, that middle level: temperance, fortitude, justice, and prudence. These are virtues that all men can develop. And then you'll have the theological virtues of faith, hope, and love. And those, of course, come about by divine grace. So what do you need to know from this particular unit? Be aware of his 3 levels of knowledge. Be aware of the mind as a tabula rasa and its implication. Be able to explain the relationship, as far as Aquinas is concerned, between faith and reason. Have an idea about his concept of happiness, the beatific vision. Importantly, understand the 4 laws and the relationship between them, and how he argued that natural law, being an expression of the divine law, would be profound and influential for the moral law for all mankind. And again, you say something of his concept of virtue, which is very similar to, but different from, Aristotle's. Well, thank you for watching.